As an independent institute of higher education and a registered charity, the growth and success of Cambridge Muslim College rely on the generosity of our friends, patrons, and supporters from across the UK and beyond. Help Cambridge Muslim College train future generations of Muslim scholars, thinkers, and leaders, and continue delivering educational series like our Ramadan programming. You can help us continue our vital work through regular giving. Become a friend or patron of the college today through one-off donations, whatever the amount. You can also pay your zakat to the college, directly benefiting students in need. Visit cambridgemuslimcollege.ac.uk/donate and donate today. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Abdallah Rothman. Welcome to this fourth session of Faithful Wellbeing. This has been an ongoing session and series that we've been doing throughout the month of Ramadan as part of Cambridge Muslim College's series on building Taqwa. And so what we've been discussing over the month throughout these sessions that we've had together, we started talking about Taqwa as God consciousness and not necessarily as fear, but involving love and surrender in this process of developing or building taqwa. We talked about in the second session about developing presence and awareness and how this can deepen our sense of well-being in being in a state of rida or contentment or release that opens ourselves to being able to be in submission. And then in the last session, previous week, we talked about living with the akhirah in mind for aligning ourself and our heart with the reality so that we can do this work internally that we need to do to both cultivate our well-being and our taqwa interlinked. And so for our last session together today, we want to focus on embodying all of this in practical ways so that we can really carry this forward to the rest of the year in our daily lives, and really not making this separation between religiosity and our regular life. We tend to do that a lot in general, but also in this month of Ramadan, we can tend to do all of our mujahada, our struggling and our striving and our increasing of our taqwa, and then we go back into regular life and the busyness. And so well-being from an Islamic perspective, the lens that we've been looking at taqwa through, is really understanding that our whole life, our whole way of being is impacted by our orientation to life with consciousness of Allah. When we get caught up in the dunya and caught up in our self-direction, we can get out of whack, out of sorts, and we get all these experiences of being out of balance, out of sync, whereas our true nature and purpose is to be recognition of Allah and in submission. So that taqwa, not just being a cognitive notion, but being an embodied state of submission. And so we talked about success in this life, and that when we think of success, even for well-being, it's not necessarily defined just as material success or the material markers of well-being, but our main focus from this Islamic perspective is spiritual success, the part of ourselves that is going to live beyond this life, and therefore our priority is caring for the well-being of our soul, the inner dimension of ourselves that is not bound to our physical manifestation, that is temporary. That doesn't mean we separate from the physical. We have to embody the physical as the doorway and pathway to care for the soul. And so often when we think of well-being from a purely secular sense, it's understood as having holistic health as defined by sort of physical or behavioral markers. And we tend to look at, well, if somebody has psychological balance and social balance and financial balance and all of these markers, then that means they're well. And if those things are not there, then must mean that they're not well. But if we're looking at the larger picture of Allah's reality that includes the unseen and includes the soul and the state of the soul, then the reality within that paradigm is that one can have physical illness or social and financial struggles and still be in a state of rida, of contentment, and taqwa, of being conscious of Allah. And so they can be truly well in the spiritual sense, because wellness or well-being, like we defined before, involving the akhirah, means that really the ultimate is for the soul to be in submission, to recognize its reliance on Allah and to be in submission to that. Not necessarily to have the things that we determine as success or what we're trying to achieve in terms of what's more comfortable or more desirable in this life. And so from an Islamic perspective, our measure of well-being is primarily concerned with our spiritual nature. Where we are in relation to our submission. Because, like I said, we can be fully submitted and have everything seemingly in disrepair and disorder. But that's all temporary. That doesn't go with us to the next life. And so when we open to this and we live this life with awareness of this reality, and we sort of are in a state of giving over our affairs to Allah, then in this we are successful. In this we have true well-being. Being conscious of this reality allows us to give over our affairs. And so taqwa opens the doors to this divine facilitation. This and this giving over of everything to Allah is like unburdening ourselves, and it develops this sense of internal peace, and not carrying and being constricted with concerning ourselves with what is not ours to be concerned with. This is usually where we get out of sorts, where we have psychological, emotional, physical, social imbalance when we're trying to get control over things we don't have control over. When we're looking at our life from this self-directed state, we're trying to get control and we're in constriction, whereas we want to be in submission. And so many stressors come from trying to control outcomes that are ultimately with Allah. And so taqwa does mean acting responsibly, doing what is within our realm of responsibility, but also entrusting the outcomes, the results, to Allah's hikmah. And this is hard for us to manage sometimes, because in our struggling and striving to do the work of responsibility and what is ours, we get caught on the outcomes. I'm doing this thing for this thing to happen. And that's where a lot of our problems come from, because then that takes us out of not only the moment, which is where we can be in submission to Allah, but it takes us out of the picture of what is ours and what is Allah's. And that does impact our mental health and our spiritual health. And so we can experience a lot of psychological distress when we go against this nature of ourselves being reliant on Allah and trying to control outcomes and be self-directed and be focused on our plans. This is not just a theoretical orientation. It becomes what we become obsessed with so much that we carry this in our bodies. We carry this in our hearts. We're preoccupied in our thoughts of we want it to be how we want it to be. It may not even be from this place of nafs, of I want, but it's from a place of self-directedness, of sort of forgetting that Allah is the one who is in charge, and that Allah is the one who's the best of planners, and that Allah is Al-Hakim. Allah has the wisdom. And so we forget that just because we feel directed to something doesn't mean that that's what's best for us. And that can discombobulate us in all forms, and really impact our well-being. And this comes from trying to carry more than we should, trying to bear the burden of things that aren't ours to carry. And when we do that, we get worn down. And that doesn't mean that we can't carry a lot, right? Because we know that we have a huge capacity to bear what comes to us. But we need to know what is ours to bear. So when we know that Allah in the Quran says that Allah does not burden any soul with more than they can bear. And so I think sometimes we can hear that and think, oh, that means I have to take it all on. Like I have to carry it all. And I think what we need to understand is our aqeedah needs to be aligned in a way that we're living it, in that remembering that we're not the ones who determine the outcomes, nor are we able to even carry what's going to happen. What is ours to carry is what is within our domain of control. And so we're not we're not meant to bear the burden of all of the things, because we're not able to or meant to be responsible for most of those things that we think are our responsibility. And so what we need to recognize and surrender to is this distinction between what is ours and what is Allah's. Often the things that we're taking the burden of are not within our locus of control. We're focused on, well, I need to make sure that outcome doesn't happen. And so I'm going to do all this to block that from happening. We don't know what's meant to happen. We know what we are meant to struggle and strive with. And so we can forget that this is the setup. We forget that Allah is in charge of what happens. We're in charge of our relationship with what is given to us, how it impacts our state, how we continue the striving and struggle and responsibility while completely having tawakkul, of trust in Allah, and giving over the outcomes, so that we're still working, but we know that the working, the striving to achieve, let's say, the achievement is in the submission, not in the outcome, because the outcome is not ours to determine. And oftentimes that gets confusing because we're motivated to achieve based on an outcome. And then we jump to the outcome and we miss the point of the striving, the turning our hearts to turn to Allah. And so essentially when we preoccupy ourselves with all of this, running after our own pictures of how things should be, and trying to get control over the things that we don't have control over, that are outside of our locus of control, it's all essentially wasted energy, because we're not focusing on what is ours to bear. And this wears us down psychologically, emotionally, physically, and by nature, then spiritually even. We get blocked off from our spiritual nature of just being Abdallah, being in submission. And the Abd is one who is just waiting for direction, not the one who's out there making the decisions and deciding, okay, this is what I should be doing and I'm going to pursue it. It's being a servant, waiting for the signs, acting. It's not about not acting. We do, but we do it only what is in service of Allah, not in service of our own self. And this is why it's very important to, when we do this work of self-development, we need to temper it and really see this through an Islamic lens, because a lot of times the messages of the trending sort of secular version of self-help is quite opposite. It's feeding into the self-direction, doing what you want to do, doing what you think is best for you. And while there's parts of that are accurate in terms of self-care, self-love, self-mercy, if we love ourselves, then we love Allah. We love Allah, we love ourselves. The motivating factor should be towards surrender and service to Allah, not service to our own needs or our own self. And so we can lift this burden of caring by the things that we carry that wear us down, that aren't ours, by giving it back to Allah. Then we can be left to carry what is ours to be concerned with, which we discussed as what is in our internal locus of control, our thoughts, our feelings, our intentions, and our state of presence with Allah. That we can cultivate all of these things. We have control over the domain of our internal state of being. And this is why we want to frame taqwa as this awareness of Allah's presence, so that we can be present in the moment with what is ours, to align ourselves with this surrender, rather than chasing the doing out of fear for a future outcome. It's all about what do we do now in this moment, and how do we tend to our hearts. This is the most important part of us. At the center is our heart. But the heart is not an abstract thing. It's not a theoretical notion. It's here in our chest, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, "Astafti qalbak," when like this. And so there's an embodied aspect to being in our hearts, and an embodied aspect of building taqwa and embodying well-being, embodying Islam. Being in a state of Islam is a bodily experience. We can be letting go of those burdens, giving it over to Allah, has a physical feel, has a physical look. It's embodied. This is why our worship is embodied. And so, even though we could say, yes, our ibadah is embodied, and so we just need to pray, fast, make wudu, the issue is that we tend to split these things into religious life, and then we have regular life over here. And we tend to, and not for all of us, but many of us, we tend to make this split where we're doing these behaviors because we think that Allah needs them from us. And so there's this removed transactional way that we're doing these behaviors, rather than realizing that the behaviors, the embodied practices, are to cultivate a state. And so we could say, pray, fast, make wudu, do all these things, and yes, by nature of they will sort our heart out. But as contemporary people who have been sort of shifted away from the infusion of the sacred within the mundane, we need to do a little bit of extra work to retrain ourselves to integrate the sacred into our daily and the embodied experience of our ibadah. And so we do need to do most of us need to do some work to realign with the embodied aspect of the spiritual reality in the mundane life. And the best, or maybe easiest way, or most accessible way to do this is through the body. Just like we are disciplining the body by fasting in this month of Ramadan in order to discipline the soul, right? The idea of fasting there's many different levels to it, but essentially by using our will to discipline our nafs and our desire for food, we are disciplining the spiritual part of ourselves that has control over our being, disciplining our nafs. And so we can incorporate the same principles of struggling and striving into our daily lives throughout the year. Allah says in Surah Ankabut, for those who strive in us, this mujahada, we shall surely guide them to our ways. So there's an aspect of the striving, the embodied striving and struggle, that leads us to be in alignment with the ways of Allah, rather than I need to know everything that Allah tells me to do so that I do those things in a transactional way. The embodiment, the striving for changing our state, which then changes our limbs in behavior, leads us to an aligned way of being in what's pleasing to Allah. It's not just what do I do to please Him out there, but what do I be, how do I be to be in a state that is pleasing to Him in presence with Him here. And so this means when we leave this month of Ramadan, to incorporate these principles into our daily life, yes, fasting more often. We should bring fasting into the rest of the year, because this is a way of disciplining our soul, and it's an embodied practice. It involves the body. But also we should be incorporating taqwa into our even physical activities and ways of being. So if even the way that we walking, the way that we breathe, the way that we interact in our physical bodies, in our busy lives, we need to be bringing conscious awareness of Allah into those mundane practices, to not split it out into, when I pray salah is when I do my ibadah or my connection with Allah, when I'm making dua or when I'm practicing or I'm going to Jummah, but that as we're dealing with the workplace, as we're dealing with family relationships, as we are taking a walk in the park, that we're seeing Allah present in our lives, in reality. Being present, like we said, Allah is nearer to you than your jugular vein. He says this about Himself. And so we have to embody that. The jugular vein is in our body. Why does Allah give us these physical markers to understand the nearness of what we should be conscious of? And so even to the level of, if you have an exercise routine, first of all, if you don't have an exercise routine, I highly recommend that you have one. And this is because we're meant to be physical. It's better that we're physical, growing food and doing labor and riding horses and doing archery and these things. But if we can't fit those things in our life practically, then some people, we go to the gym. We have exercise routines. We do practice at home. We should be doing those things also with taqwa. So not just doing resistance training or stretching, but as you're stretching, you're breathing and you're remembering your submission on a bodily level, embodying a state of Islam, incorporating taqwa, so that you're not splitting out the religious life or religiosity with, okay, I'm just going to take care of my body from a physical health perspective. Everything we should do should be integral to our spiritual remembrance of our spiritual reality. The deen is for this life. It's the lens with which we should approach everything. No separation. So bringing taqwa into your embodied practices will help your prayer deepen, will help you have more khushu. Walking in the park and remembering Allah, feeling your chest expand with breath. Putting your hand on your chest and doing this process of istafti qalbi. What's going on internally inside of me? And so opening your body to feel the presence using your heart to sense and to perceive and be present with Allah's presence in the world around you. Allah does not exist in anywhere in the creation, but our hearts can be connected and perceive Allah, and there are signs of Allah's presence in everything because everything is in remembrance of Allah. The human being is the only thing that we have to choose to be in remembrance of Allah. The trees are in remembrance of Allah. The wind is in remembrance of Allah. The ocean, the animals, the birds. And so when you open your bodily senses to these things, it puts you physically, viscerally in a state of remembrance. And so we should allow taqwa not to be primarily a cognitive assertion of remembering a theoretical God, but a lived experience in the body. And so this active striving, the mujahada, this bestows guidance and well-being in us, insha'Allah. And so as we bring these sessions to a close, and this topic of building taqwa and this idea of faithful well-being, meaning having faith, our faith infused with our personal development and our state of developing our health and well-being psychologically and emotionally, as well as spiritually, that this is infused with this process of building taqwa, and it's a lifelong endeavor. It's not something that's achieved overnight, and it's not something that's achieved through memorization of ideas or text. That is important, but it also has to be embodied. It has to be developed. It has to be cultivated. And so this path of developing taqwa through developing our well-being is an ongoing process. It's something that we should not think of as, I need to do this now so I can get to this place and then I'll be okay. We have to recognize this is actually what we're here for. That's what we're supposed to be doing in this life, is constantly being engaged in personal self-reflection to constantly be renewing our Islam. We don't just become Muslim once and then that's it, we coast. We want to be renewing our Islam in each moment, in each breath. And so this is the mujahada. This is the jihad al-akbar, the struggle within the self. And to remain conscious of Allah and constantly renewing our surrender, I would invite you to continue incorporating these physical acts of mujahada throughout the year. Take the practices that you've been doing with your fasting and your reading Quran, maybe standing longer for tahajjud, and reading more and spending more time with family, even socially. Bring these things into the month, beyond the month, into the rest of the year, and really infuse them with everything else in your life. Don't make a separation between the religious and the sacred and the mundane. Find ways, even if you need guidance, to help you develop and continue this. So I invite you to join our courses and webinars that we have for guided, and we also have guided practices of tafakkur and muraqabah. You can find all this guidance and courses and community at daralshifa.com. And this is just so that we can all encourage one another on this path of continued development and understanding that the path of Islam, the path of building taqwa, is a path of personal reflection and personal development to develop our well-being. And so, again, continue this journey. Don't leave it behind in this sacred month. This month is indeed special, but life is sacred. Life is, we have the opportunity to increase our nearness to Allah in every moment, in everything that we do, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in our relationships with our loved ones. Every moment, every experience is sacred because Allah's reality is infused in this material reality. There isn't a separation. And so living with this remembrance takes effort on our part. It takes coming back to this place of remembrance and surrender constantly. And it takes committing to routines that prioritize spiritual health within our psychological, physical, financial, social health. We have to remember that all these other things, our psychology, our physicality, our finances, our social communities, these are all temporary. These are all only in the dunya. Our spiritual state goes with us. So we want to be prioritizing that in all of the things that we do and infusing it in everything we do. So I ask Allah to deepen our taqwa, to strengthen our faith, and to grant us holistic well-being in this life and the next. Insha'Allah. Ameen, ameen, ameen. I wish you a good ending to this month of Ramadan with you and your loved ones. May Allah bless you, and may Allah put you in a better state leaving this month than when you entered it. And thank you for joining me. I look forward to more engagement with you in the future. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ramadan provides us with an invaluable opportunity to increase our piety, our God consciousness. It is also an opportune time to give generously in charity. As an independent institution of higher education and a registered charity, our work relies on the generosity of individuals like you. During this blessed month, we ask you to support Cambridge Muslim College. You can do so through regular giving, by becoming a friend or patron, or one-off donations, whatever the amount. This Ramadan, our goal is to make 10,000 new friends. Head to the donate page on our website, become a friend for as little as £5 a month, and help us continue delivering educational programs like this for the wider community, training the next generation of Muslim scholars, thinkers, and leaders.